Most people picture someone with a very high IQ as obviously impressive, confident, outspoken, the kind of person who commands a room and makes sure everyone in it knows they're the smartest one there. Psychology research tells a completely different story. The behavioral patterns most consistently found in people with extremely high intelligence don't look like intelligence at all. Some of them look like the opposite. What decades of cognitive research have shown is that a very high IQ doesn't just make someone think faster, it changes the entire way a person processes the world. And that difference shows up in specific, recognizable ways, most of which are almost universally misread by the people around them. Here are the psychological patterns research consistently finds in people with extremely high intelligence, starting with the one that explains everything else. Pattern 1. They cut people off, but not for the reason you think. This is the pattern that brings most people to this topic. The highly intelligent person who simply stops showing up, who withdraws from friendships without explanation, who becomes harder to reach, harder to engage, and eventually disappears from social environments entirely. From the outside, it looks like arrogance, like they've decided other people aren't worth their time. The psychology tells a different story. In 2016, psychologists Satoshi Kanazawa and Norman Lee published research in the British Journal of Psychology, examining the relationship between intelligence and social satisfaction. Their finding directly contradicted the assumption that more social connection always means more well-being. For most people, frequent social interaction correlates with higher life satisfaction. For people with higher intelligence, the relationship inverted. More frequent social interaction was associated with lower life satisfaction, and the effect became more pronounced as intelligence increased. But the study raises the question the data alone doesn't answer. Why would connection feel less rewarding rather than more? The answer lies in what the highly intelligent brain is doing during every social interaction, and what it costs. Research on neural efficiency, first documented by Richard Heyer and colleagues in the early 1990s, showed that higher intelligence correlates with lower overall brain activity during cognitive tasks. The highly intelligent brain uses less energy to process the same information, which means it reaches the ceiling of a given stimulus faster. A conversation that feels engaging and novel to most participants may register as fully processed and therefore unstimulating to someone whose brain moves through information at a significantly different rate. This isn't contempt. It's a neurological mismatch between what the environment is offering and what the brain requires to stay engaged. And when that mismatch is consistent enough for long enough, withdrawal becomes not a choice, but a rational response to an unsustainable equation. Pattern 2. Their mind never fully switches off. People with very high IQs frequently report that their thinking doesn't stop. Not during rest, not late at night, not during activities most people find relaxing. There's always a background process running, turning over a problem, revisiting a conversation, building a theory, running mental simulations for things that haven't happened yet. Psychologist Kazimierz Dabrowski studied this extensively in gifted individuals and described it through his theory of overexcitabilities. He found that highly intelligent people experience what he called psychomotor overexcitability, a restless internal energy that expresses itself mentally rather than physically. A drive to think that doesn't have a natural off switch. Neuroscientist Rex Jung's research at the University of New Mexico found that higher intelligence is associated with richer connectivity between distant regions of the brain, not just faster processing in isolated areas. The highly intelligent brain doesn't just think more quickly, it makes connections across a much larger network of ideas simultaneously, all the time. That constant connectivity is what makes rest difficult. The brain isn't malfunctioning, it's doing exactly what it was built to do. And in social environments, where the highly intelligent person is simultaneously processing the conversation, analyzing the subtext, monitoring their own responses, and running parallel threads of thought that the conversation triggered. The cognitive cost of participation is significantly higher than it appears from the outside. Pattern 3. They feel things more deeply than they show. This is the pattern that surprises people most. There's a widespread assumption that high intelligence comes with emotional detachment, the cold, rational thinker who lives entirely in the mind. Psychology research directly contradicts this. People with significantly elevated IQs actually tend to feel things with greater intensity than average, not less. Dabrowski identified this as emotional overexcitability, a heightened responsiveness to emotional stimuli that makes highly intelligent individuals acutely sensitive to beauty, music, injustice, and the suffering of others. A study published in the journal Intelligence found that higher measured IQ correlated with significantly greater emotional reactivity and emotional depth, particularly in response to art, moral questions, and human behavior. The reason this trait is so often invisible is that highly intelligent people are also typically very good at internal regulation. They feel intensely, they show selectively. The result is a person who appears calm or detached while internally processing far more than the people around them realize. And in social environments where that internal experience consistently goes unrecognized, where the emotional depth they're bringing to every interaction meets responses calibrated for a much shallower level of engagement, withdrawal becomes a form of protection. Not from other people, from the exhaustion of being misread. Pattern 4. They're comfortable saying, "I don't know." This one surprises people because high intelligence is assumed to produce high confidence. Psychology research consistently shows the opposite pattern. People with very high IQs are far more likely to acknowledge the limits of their knowledge than people with average IQs, and they do it genuinely, not as a social performance. This connects directly to what psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger documented in their landmark 1999 research. The finding that limited knowledge often produces overconfidence because the person doesn't know enough to see the complexity that exists in a domain. Highly intelligent people, by contrast, understand that complexity intimately. They've thought deeply enough and encountered enough exceptions to see how much remains genuinely uncertain. So when a highly intelligent person says, "I don't know," it isn't hesitation, it's precision. And it's one of the most reliable markers of genuine intelligence that psychology has consistently identified. The person who holds every opinion with absolute certainty, regardless of evidence, is almost never the most intelligent person in the room. Pattern 5. They struggle to find people who can follow them. This is one that highly intelligent people rarely talk about openly, but research shows is nearly universal among them. They find it genuinely difficult to find people they can fully connect with intellectually, not because they believe they're superior to others, but because conversations that don't go deep enough, or people who aren't interested in the same kinds of questions, leave them experiencing what psychologist Leta Hollingworth called stimulus poverty. The experience of a mind that can't find sufficient challenge or depth in its immediate environment. What Hollingworth observed in decades of research on gifted individuals wasn't arrogance. It was a quiet longing for real conversation, for someone who could follow them all the way to the bottom of an idea without needing to turn back. The result is that highly intelligent people sometimes appear aloof or distant, not because they lack social ability, but because they've learned from repeated experience that most conversations aren't built to hold the depth they require. So they hold back. They calibrate themselves down. And a significant portion of who they actually are never enters the room at all. Pattern 6. They change their minds when the evidence changes. Highly intelligent people tend to treat beliefs as working theories rather than fixed identities. When new information appears, information that directly contradicts what they previously believed, their brain updates the model. They don't experience changing their mind as a threat to who they are. They experience it as accuracy. In psychology, this is called cognitive flexibility, and it's one of the most consistent markers of advanced problem-solving ability. The highly intelligent brain isn't attached to being right about any specific thing. It's interested in having the most accurate possible picture of reality, even when that means discarding something it previously held with confidence. From the outside, this can look like inconsistency. A person who shifts positions appears unreliable. But what's actually happening is the opposite of uncertainty. It's a mind running a continuous, honest update process. The people who never change their minds, regardless of evidence, who treat their opinions as identity rather than hypothesis, are almost never the most intelligent people in the room. Pattern 7. They observe far more than they say. In conversations and group settings, highly intelligent people often default to watching before speaking. They listen to what isn't being said as much as to what is. They pick up on the patterns in social dynamics. Who defers to whom, where the real tension is, what the conversation is actually about beneath the surface, before they contribute anything. Research on social intelligence and general cognitive ability consistently shows that higher IQ correlates with greater accuracy in reading social cues and emotional signals. But it also means highly intelligent individuals often need more time to process what they're observing before they respond. They're not slower thinkers, they're gathering more data first. This creates a frustrating and common misread. The quiet, observing person is frequently assumed to have the least to contribute. In reality, they often have the most complete picture of what's actually happening in the room. Pattern 8. They procrastinate hardest on the work that matters most. This is the pattern that highly intelligent people often find most confusing about themselves. The projects with the most personal meaning, the work with the greatest potential, are frequently the hardest to begin. Smaller, lower-stakes tasks get done with ease. The work that could genuinely represent their full capabilities seems to live permanently at the edge of starting. Researchers studying high cognitive ability individuals found that this pattern isn't laziness. It's what they identified as complexity awareness. Before beginning a significant piece of work, a highly intelligent brain comprehends the full scope of what excellent would require. Every flaw the finished product might contain, every way it could fall short of the standard the mind can already clearly see. Psychologist Dweck's research identified this as particularly common in gifted individuals. Not a fear of failure exactly, but a fear of the gap between internal vision and external output. The procrastination isn't an absence of care, it's the presence of too much of it. The work that never starts is almost always the work that matters most. Pattern 9. They get bored faster than almost anyone around them. Highly intelligent people tend to habituate quickly. They need more novel input to maintain the same level of engagement that most people get from familiar routines. Not just in obvious situations like repetitive tasks or slow meetings. At a neurological level, the stimulus that satisfied yesterday doesn't satisfy at the same level today. Neuroscientific research has linked higher cognitive ability to higher baseline dopamine activity in the prefrontal cortex, the brain's reward system for new information and intellectual challenge. When that challenge disappears, the signal drops sharply. The restlessness isn't a mood, it's a physiological response to insufficient stimulation. This is why highly intelligent people often pursue multiple interests simultaneously, change directions more than once, or find themselves strangely dissatisfied in situations that appear perfectly comfortable from the outside. The brain isn't being ungrateful, it's running a search for what it was built to find. And in social environments calibrated for average stimulation, in relationships that have settled into predictable patterns, in conversations that cycle through familiar territory, the highly intelligent person isn't withdrawing because they've stopped caring. They're withdrawing because the environment has stopped offering what they need to stay present. Pattern 10. They question themselves more than anyone would expect. Persistent self-doubt is one of the most consistent findings in the psychology of high intelligence, and one of the most counterintuitive. People with very high IQs often experience a degree of internal uncertainty that the people around them would find difficult to believe. Not performative humility, genuine, recurring doubt about whether their thinking is as reliable as others assume. This connects directly to the Dunning-Kruger effect, but at the high end. The deeper your understanding of a subject, the more clearly you can see how much remains uncertain. The more you know, the more accurately you can see everything you don't know. Intelligence doesn't produce certainty. It produces a more precise map of how much territory remains unexplored. Psychologist Albert Ellis observed that highly intelligent individuals were frequently the most prone to holding their own output to a standard not applied to anyone else, and treating any gap between performance and potential as evidence of fundamental inadequacy. The doubt isn't a sign of lesser intelligence. It's often the most reliable signature of a greater one. Pattern 11. They carry a quiet sense of not quite belonging. This is the pattern that ties everything else together. Highly intelligent people frequently report a quiet but persistent sense of not quite fitting in their social groups, in their professions, sometimes in the world at large. Not dramatic alienation, a subtle, ongoing awareness of being slightly out of sync with the immediate environment around them. This isn't a personality disorder or a social deficiency. It's the predictable result of experiencing the world at a different level of resolution than most of the people around you. When your brain processes more, connects more, feels more intensely, and requires more depth than the environment consistently offers, a quiet sense of displacement is almost inevitable. Not because something went wrong, because something works differently. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, whose decades of research on creativity and exceptional minds remain among the most significant in cognitive psychology, found that individuals with the greatest intellectual capacity almost universally described their inner lives as the most complex, the most difficult to explain, and the hardest to share. Not because they were uniquely suffering, but because they were experiencing life at a level of detail that most people around them weren't. And living at that resolution changes what you notice, what you need, and what ordinary social life is capable of giving you. Which of these 11 patterns felt most accurate to your experience? Drop the number in the comments. And if you've spent years carrying the quiet sense that you process the world differently than the people around you, watch this next. The psychology of people who prefer to be alone. It's not what most people think. Because solitude and loneliness are not the same thing, and understanding the difference changes how you see both. See you there.